I'm proud to yield back the balance of my time and turn the floor over to my good friend, my colleague, someone I admire immensely, a fellow Jeffersonian, Roscoe Bartlett of Maryland.
The gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 18, 2007, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Bartlett, for 60 minutes.
We hold on 1 second. We're going to get a message from the president.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Secretary.
I'm directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
The gentleman from Maryland may proceed for 60 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, if Thomas Jefferson could be resurrected today, he would be surprised by many things that he found. As my good friend from Texas just indicated, he would be enormously surprised by the size of our federal government, because he'd envisioned a country in which we had a very limited federal government. But there's something else that I remember about Thomas Jefferson that would really surprise him today. What he wanted for his new country was a largely agrarian society with just enough cities to provide the manufacturing necessary to sustain an agricultural economy. And he wanted this, he said, because he didn't want his new country to be blighted by the decadence of cities, as was the countries of Europe and the British Isles that they came from. He really would be quite surprised if he could be resurrected and come to our country today, wouldn't he, where far more than half of our people live in cities far larger than any that he could have imagined at that time. Mr. Speaker, this, I believe, is the 42nd time that I have come here to the floor to talk about energy and primarily about oil. The first time I came here was a little over 3 years ago, and oil was just over $50 a barrel then. And I was talking about a history that, had we paid attention to it, would have told us that today, or sometime roughly near this, we would be here with oil at $115 a barrel. That's what it touched in Asia overnight. And with gasoline at the pump out there, averaging somewhere near $3.50 a gallon. It was absolutely inevitable that we would be here. It was predicted that we would be here. And with all of these warnings, we really should have been doing something about that. And why we weren't is a very interesting subject. There were two speeches given on energy in the last century that I think will be increasingly recognized as, one of them the most important speech given, and the other one the most insightful speech given on energy. And I have here a quote from what I think was perhaps the most insightful speech given on energy. It was a speech given by Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of our nuclear submarine, to a group of physicians in St. Paul, Minnesota, on the 14th day of May, 1957. He says, in the 8,000 years from the beginning of history to the year 2000 AD, he was looking ahead. World population will have grown from 10 million to 4 billion. He really missed that, didn't he? It's nearly 7 billion. He really had a pretty good concept of what energy was doing for us, but he had underestimated the contribution that energy would make to the growth of our population, because we're now somewhere near 7 billion people. With 90% of that growth, more than 90%, taking place during the last 5% of that period in 400 years. It took the first 3,000 years of recorded history to accomplish the first doubling of population. 100 years from the first doubling, but the next doubling will occur will require only 50 years, and of course required less than that because we're now far more than doubled. The next chart kind of depicts what Hyman Rickover was talking about, and what this shows is the last part of that 8,000 years of recorded history. We have here only about 400 years of it, but if you went back the rest of the 8,000 years, the graph would look about the same. The production of energy was down there so near zero that it looked like it was on the zero line. And here we see the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It began with wood, of course, and that's the brown line there. And then we discovered coal, and we produced considerably more energy. And then we discovered gas and oil, and boy, it shot up. Now, if I had a curve of the growth in population, it would just track almost precisely this curve in the increase in energy available. This is an interesting curve, and I'd like to spend just a moment looking at it. It is a very steep curve. Now, we can make this curve much less steep if we compress the ordinate, and a little later we'll have some curves that are that way. But you can still see the essentials of what this curve shows you. Here's the oil price spike hikes of the 70s, and you see that it resulted in a worldwide recession that actually reduced the use of oil. And now, after recovery from that recession, with a great deal more respect for efficiency, we are now increasing our use of energy at a very much lesser slope. Now, in this chart where we have such a compressed deficit, that is not as evident. It will be later, and later when we come to that, I will point to the fact that this very steep curve, were it to have continued, we'd be off the top of the chart, and we would be in considerably more trouble relative to energy than we are today. The next chart is another quote from this great speech that Hyman Rickover gave a little over 50 years ago. There is nothing that man can do to rebuild exhausted fossil fuels reserve. When they are gone, they are gone. You can't recycle energy. When it's used, it's gone. They were created by solar energy a very long time ago, he says 50 million years ago, and took eons to grow to their present volume. In the face of the fact that basic fact that fossil fuel reserves are finite, the exact length of time, I want you to listen to this statement. So insightful. The exact length of time these reserves will last is important in only one respect. The longer they last, the more time do we have to invent ways of living off renewable or substitute energy sources and to adjust our economy to the vast changes which we can expect from such a shift. 51 years ago. Tremendous advice. He recognized it, and he says that we were living in a golden age, and exactly how long this golden age lasted would be important in only one regard, that the longer it lasted, the more time would we have to shift to alternative sources of fuel, because fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, are not infinite. They are finite. They will run out. The only question was not if, it was when would they run out. He said the longer that they lasted, the more time would we have to invent ways of living off renewable or substitute energy sources. The world has done essentially none of that in the 51 years since he made that statement and gave that counsel. We have behaved in our use of fossil fuels as if they were in fact infinite, as if they would always be there. Tomorrow there will be another huge find, and we could just go on using as much energy as we wish for as long as we wish. The next chart is another quote from Hyman Rickover. Whether this golden age will continue depends entirely upon our ability to keep energy supplies in balance with the needs of our growing population. And oil is $115 a barrel, and gas is $3.50 a gallon at the pump, because we have not been able to keep energy supplies in balance with the needs of our growing population and our growing economies in this country and around the world. And we now have an imbalance between supply and demand. The demand is greater than the supply, and whenever that happens, of course, the price goes up, and the price has gone up.